Okay, my name is Stacy Lynn Hill. I'm the Utah Instructor of Record, and I'm also a professor of psychology. I teach learning and memory psychology. So most of the curriculum that I have developed is specifically designed for uh, testing retention and recall. And how I generally conduct my sessions is you will receive, like you did, a learning objectives. We will review test specific items, and then we will run over a quiz, particularly so that we can not just test for your knowledge, but for those questions that maybe may feel tricky or have tricky wording, we can kind of take those apart and identify what those look like so that they don't hijack your brain on the test. And just so you know, I had the flu real bad for a couple of weeks, so I got a little cough. Pardon me if I get a little choppy, but I've got plenty of water and Gatorade and tea, and we will muddle through. And don't hesitate if you have a question, and if I don't see the hand raised, don't hesitate to shout out. Really, some of the key to understanding uh, maybe some of the more confusing concepts or something that you would want to delineate is discussion. Discussion really helps us retain material. So please don't hesitate to chime in if you're confused about something. So we'll do the appraisal and valuation section and the quiz, and then we'll take a short break and we'll do some advanced appraisal concepts, and then a quiz with that. And hopefully, by the time that we're finished with this, you will have most of what you need to know. In the advanced appraisal, which we'll do next, you will note that I have put some appraisal and valuation math with a step-by-step answer sheet in the back so that you can practice those on your own time. Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, I believe. Let me look. It's either 9:30 or 10. Should be 11 Central Time. 10 a.m. Mountain Time, 11 Central Time. I'm doing a real estate math calculations class. And so you are more than welcome to join me for that as well. I will provide you math worksheets, and I will provide you step-by-step answer sheets. So when you practice on your own, if you miss a step or you kind of screw up on a step, you'll be able to look back at that answer sheet and say, oh, this is what I did and this is why. The answer is the answer. Okay, appraisal and valuation, learning objectives. We're going to talk about the qualifications and the levels of appraisers. We are going to learn about the Financial Institution Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act, discuss the four elements of an appraisal. We're going to list the steps in the appraisal process. This is that checklist I sent you. We're going to talk about the different kinds of reports and their functions, discuss the nature of value, understand the difference between cost and price. We will explain what the neighborhood cycle is. We're going to talk about what assemblage and plottage are, and we're going to discuss situs and how that affects the value of property. Okay, valuation is the process of estimating an opinion of value. Market value is what a property should bring as far as fair market value when it is priced on an open and free market, and what that total would be at closing. It's not necessarily a determination of market price, but an estimation of value based on the opinion of an appraiser. And we know that if you can hire 10 different appraisers and you would probably get 10 different estimations of value. However, those estimations of value should be within a fairly close range of one another if the appraiser is doing their job and they know what they're doing with that estimation of value. They should be able to understand how to um, do comps and do comps that are appropriate and relevant. And those comps change from time to time. Now, a lot of brokers and licensees, and this is one of the most valuable skills that you can possess, along with being able to read and understand and explain contracts. A lot of brokers and licensees who can do a fairly good comparative market analysis or broker price opinion are worth their weight in gold. And keep in mind that those CMAs need to be updated frequently, every 3 to 4 months, because the market shifts, the market changes. And so those comparisons are going to change fairly frequently. It's not something that you can just put a list of comparatives together and then just hang on to that for months and months and months. So typically an appraiser is hired during the executory phase of the contract. So the contract, the purchase agreement has been signed, and the appraiser is hired to determine whether the sales price matches the market value. In the purchase agreement, there is a contingency clause that essentially states that if the appraisal is not at or above that listing price, then the buyer can pull out of the contract. But when they match or the appraised value is higher, then the property goes to closing. If the sale price is higher than the market value, the buyer and seller, the buyer can back out, or the buyer and seller can negotiate. The Federal Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act, that's known as FIERA, in 1989, requires that a real estate appraisal be used with any federally backed loan transaction. And to qualify for an appraiser classification, an individual has to satisfy all the requirements, educational, experiential, and examination requirements set by the state. And the guidelines are adopted from the Appraisal Foundation. That's a national organization composed of several major appraisal organizations. And there are 4 levels of those appraisal classifications, of course, each requiring additional education, training, examination requirements. So a state registered appraiser can conduct real estate appraisal only when working under the supervision of a licensed or certified appraiser. This classification requires an appraisal licensing course, doesn't have to have any prerequisite experience. Other classifications, of course, require additional coursework and documented hours. A state licensed appraiser, which is different than a state registered appraiser, may appraise non-complex 1 to 4 family residential units valued at less than $1 million. With a complex 1 to 4 family residential units, the value must be under $250,000, which, if you can find that anywhere, I'd be surprised, but those are still the numbers. So when the property is not residential, the maximum value is $250,000. When it's residential, 1 to 4 units, it's $1 million. Your third classification is a certified residential appraiser. And a certified residential appraiser can appraise all residential 1 to 4 family units, regardless of the value or the complexity. But the same applies with the non-residential properties, having values less than 250,000. And then a certified general appraiser can appraise all types of property, regardless of value or classification. Take note that lenders who give VA or FHA loans select appraisers from an approved list, and they are always certified residential or certified general appraisers for those FHA or VA loans. And as real estate licensees, as we just talked about, though not licensed as appraisers, we can give an opinion as to value as long as we don't call it an appraisal. And again, being able to do a good broker price opinion or comparative market analysis will make you so valuable within your brokerage and to your client. Now, concerning Utah rules specifically, um, the rules governing licensees valuing property during a transaction is permitted to give an option regarding the value of real estate. We can do that to a seller, buyer, or third party, as long as we have it in writing that it is an opinion and not an appraisal, as it were. So the essential parts of an appraisal are as follows. An appraisal must have the date. The lender will usually only accept the appraised value for about 6 months. So the date has to be on there. The property description, and everyone has to agree that the property description is the property description and identifies the exact property involved in the appraisal. That usually doesn't come from just seller's paperwork. Usually the exact property description comes from title company, a county recorder, some sort of public records. The third item necessary is the estimate of value. So the appraiser is responsible to give that accurate and professional estimation of value using the proper appraisal approach, and we will talk about the different approaches in a moment. And then they reconcile the results to arrive at a final estimation of value. And what we mean by reconciling, it's exactly like reconciling a checkbook. You add and subtract all the requisite items and come to a range of value. And then, of course, the signature of the appraiser. And that signature verifies that the appraiser, and this is on your test, so accepts the liability should there be a significant error. And that the estimate that they have put down is a professional estimate of market value that can be relied on for decision making by the lender, by the clients, etc. In the uniform standards of the professional appraisal practice, the Appraisal Foundation describes appraisal process of real property as containing 8 steps. Notice that averaging is not used. You don't add everything up and then divide it by the 25 things and average it. It's never used. So that appraisal process, I'm going to share the screen with you in a minute. Okay, so that appraisal process, I kind of think of the appraisal process as like, oh, what happened there? Try that one more time. As like a research project or research report. Um, or if you've ever done like a science report, it's very similar. So first, state the objective. What's the purpose? And then all the data necessary is listed. What is needed? Then the appraiser gathers and records all of that data and determines the highest and best use for that data. Then they estimate the land value. And remember, when we're talking about commercial properties, investment properties, and you'll need to know this for your math as well, land is land is valued separate than structure. So if you're being asked a question about an investment property and the math question asks you what's the amount invested in the land, you're going to have to take the cost of any structures away from that because the land and the structures are valued separately. Then the property value is the estimate is given using the which applicable approach, the cost approach, the income approach, the market approach. And then reconciliation, again, balancing the checkbook as it were, and then complete and present that report. Jerry, did you end up seeing that share screen?
Yes, I did.
Okay, great.
You're not keeping this, it's not a continual PowerPoint presentation though, correct?
No, no, it's not. I will post documents in the chat window for your so that you can take notes in your review. Um, but I generally don't just I'll share screen as needed, but I generally just don't put like 5 points up there and then just go over those 5 points.
All right, thank you.
You bet. And if for some reason you don't get something in the chat window, you can let me know and I will email it to you directly. Okay, the reports. So there are three types of reports. Um, and when it comes to the loan application process, that is heavily dependent on the appraisal report because, of course, lenders have really strict guidelines on lending caps, and it's based on a maximum percentage of that market value or property. The letter form is the quickest, easiest way to report the estimation of value. It's the letter that contains the four parts of that appraisal, and it's often less than a full page, and it's generally put in the buyer and the seller client file, and is simply the estimation of value with those four valid parts. So the report itself is relatively simple. The gathering of the information, the accuracy, the conclusion is the same as it would be on any other report form. Now, the short form or the checklist is primarily used by the institutional lenders. And because the institutional lenders standardize the efforts of the appraisers, it just lets the lender and the title company know that everything is checked off the list to justify the value of the loan amount. And then the narrative report, which is quite comprehensive, not only provides an estimation of value, but it gives everything reasonable to justify that declaration of value. It includes photographs, maps, inventories, personnel records, comparable properties, income computations. It's used most often for commercial industrial approaches, court cases, out of town buyers. I saw a couple years ago, I went with a survey team um, to Colorado to survey a bison farm. Super neat. But the narrative report for that bison farm was almost 400 pages. So they can be that comprehensive. All right, let's talk about the essential characteristics of value. This is where we use that mnemonic dust. To have value, property has to have those four essential characteristics. And these elements are demand, utility, scarcity, and transferability. Dust. Demand is defined as the need or level of desire for an item from people with the purchasing power to acquire it. So the greater the need for an item, the greater the potential value. For example, a buyer may wish to purchase $1.5 million house, but of course, without the funds, that desire is not going to influence the sell price. However, many buyers with $300,000 to buy a house will impact the demand or the value of a property. Utility is the ability to satisfy the desire of a potential buyer. A 3-bedroom, 1-bedroom home lacks utility in most markets, right? Land in urban growth areas has the utility to a builder as a source of buildable lots, but land outside of that may lack utility. Scarcity, obviously, an item can't have value unless there is a certain degree of scarcity, only so many of something. And when something is super plentiful, there's no need to spend a lot of money on it. Therefore, it decreases in value. So value is influenced by supply and demand, and property with a view sells for more than property without a view due to scarcity. Deborah, send me your email and I will send you the video. Okay. And then transferability. Transferability refers to the fact that if an item isn't transferable, then it has no value to a prospective buyer. So the seller must have the ability to transfer marketable title. So if a property available for sale only includes a life estate, for example, fewer rights are able to be transferred and the property will have a lower value. Give me a moment. I'm going to write down her email address. Okay. When we are talking about types of value, there are four necessary dimensions of fair market value. And those are willing buyer, a willing seller, neither party being subject to duress, and that the property has been on the market long enough to determine an approximate value. We're going to talk about value in use and value in exchange. And when you have questions on your test, the value in use and value in exchange are two sides of the same coin. They're different perspectives. So value in exchange is what we call objective value for market value. It's based on willing buyer, willing seller concept, and it comes from the view of the buyer. Basically, what this says is no person is going to pay more than they have to for a property or for goods or services. So market value is defined as the most probable price a property would bring in a competitive and open market when all the conditions are necessary for a fair sale. Um, so the price is not affected um, by subjectivity, as it were. Determination of market value is done by buyers and sellers, and then appraisers give the opinion. Value in use is different. It's from the perspective of the seller. Subjective value or utility value, and it's often driven by emotion. And we know that a lot of sellers will overprice their property or believe that it's worth more than it actually is, maybe due to some emotional attachment. If you are working with a seller and they're like, yes, my grandfather built this home with his own two hands, and that it, they're going to believe that the price is that the property is going to sell for more than it actually is. And so that's called value in use. A note for you on cost versus price. Cost is what was originally paid for something, and price is what it's worth today. Um, for example, my grandparents bought a home off Highland Drive, um, right near the Dans and the Whole Foods there. Of course, the Whole Foods and all that wasn't there when they bought it in 1957 for $19,000. And they have kept it up beautifully. It's a small brick home. It's got, four bedrooms, had two bathrooms. They put in a third. They've really, really maintained it beautifully. So while it's not large, it has the upkeep has just been exceptional. And in 2023, its fair market value was $502,000. So the cost was $19,000 in 1957, and the price is $502,000. I don't know what it would be right now in 2025, but still, that's that's a pretty good job. Principles of appraisal. Principles of appraisal include highest and best use. And when you look at your checklist and you look at step 4, determining highest and best use, this is the principle that defines what will give the property the highest value for the owner. It's determined by 3 questions. Is it legal, like zoning? Is it possible? What are the physical limitations? And what will bring the highest return now or in the future. Highest and best use is the first principle of appraisal, and an appraiser must consider, and questions you will find on your test involving that highest and best use are going to oftentimes involve appraising land, raw land, or things like parking lots, because it's especially true when doing an appraisal for land. Substitution. So substitution says that no prudent person, no party is going to pay more for something than they have to. And this is the comparison approach. This is where we use our comparatives. If 2 available homes are a lot alike, then the prudent buyer is going to purchase the one with the lower price. That's our substitution. And then that third principle of appraisal is conformity. So this principle operates on the idea that value is created and maintained when a reasonable amount of similarity is maintained on properties. And 2 of the examples that you'll see, and these are part of the vocabulary words you are going to want to know: progression and regression. A smaller home next to a larger home increases the value of the smaller home. when we're talking about regression, a larger home in a small home neighborhood decreases in value. The larger home decreases in value. Um, and so the most common and obvious application for this, of course, is in subdivisions. Okay, we're going to give a quick nod to contribution and the neighborhood cycle. Contribution is often what we use in that fair market value. And this principle says an improvement must actually contribute to the value, the cost of the value of the property. And so increasing, decreasing returns. We know that adding certain improvements to a property can reach a point where they don't contribute to the value. An example would be a $15,000 swimming pool on a $200,000 property is probably not going to add $15,000 to that property. However, adding a $6,000 garage because of the utility might add $6,000 to the value. The neighborhood cycle, conceptually, you'll see this on your test, and it's represented by a cycle beginning with growth. And we see this when land has been used up in an area and building starts moving outward or upward. So we have that growth cycle. People come in and they invest in properties, build homes, invest in the infrastructure, restaurants, transportation, schools, all of those things. That's the growth cycle. And then progress to equilibrium where things kind of stabilize for a bit. And then over time, and we can see this in any city or any area, as that growth continues, we see a disintegration of that. Some of those places that were originally, new and where the more wealthy lived become now the wrong side of the tracks, right? And eventually that cycle starts over with gentrification. People come in, kind of rehab those neighborhoods, and it starts all over again. So when appraising a property, the appraiser determines where that property lies in the neighborhood cycle. If it's in a growth phase, it'll be worth more. And if it's in disintegration, it'll be worth less, even if the property's in kind of the same condition. Okay. Lastly, we're going to talk about a couple of additional considerations. Assemblage and plottage. Assemblage means joining two or more parcels of property to increase value. Note that these two or more parcels of property have to be contiguous. What that means is they have to be next to each other. So assemblage means the process of joining two or more contiguous parcels of property. Plottage is joining two or more parcels of property. They don't have to be contiguous to increase value. It's the opposite of subdividing, where things are broken into smaller pieces. An example of plottage would be if someone built a strip mall or an office, and then halfway down the block purchased a parcel of land to use as a parking lot, paid parking lot. It would increase the value. It's not contiguous. That's called plottage. And then situs, of course, we know location, location, location. It's the term that captures the essence of location. and it refers to personal preference for a particular location and how that preference or lack of preference affects the value of the property. So we all are familiar with the term situs or location, location, location. Okay, on your um, handout that I gave you, you should have your summary of key points on there. Let me double check that. Okay, and why don't we do our quiz together? Okay, so you'll have your summary of key points. These are all your testable points. Um, and for those of you who've worked with me before, um, every session that we do, I'll bring the summary of key points because when it comes time to review for your test, the idea is to be able to throw out those hundreds and hundreds of pieces of paper you have and have a summary of testable key points for each section to use as a review guide. So ideally, as you get closer and closer to your test, your stacks of paper will get smaller and smaller and smaller. Because we all know how um, overwhelming, how much information there is. So take a look at our quiz. Which of the following is not a requirement for a valid appraisal? We have four things that are necessary for a valid appraisal. A designation from an appraisal professional organization, such as MAI. B, the signature of the appraiser. B, an estimate of value. C, estimate of value. D, a description of the property. Which of the following is not an essential element of value? Scarcity, utility, cost, or transferability? For a commercial project, which of the following appraisal reports would most often be appropriate? A, narrative, B, short form, C, letter, or D, comprehensive? Mr. Kelly is trying to decide if he should put $15,000 swimming pool to increase the value of his property. He should give consideration to which of the following principles of appraisal? A, substitution, B, conformity, C, anticipation, or D, contribution? The first step of preparing an appraisal is A, reconciliation, B, gathering the data, C, determine the purpose or define the problem, A, apply as many of the three approaches to appraisal as possible. When appraising a vacant lot, the first principle an appraiser should consider is A, highest and best use, B, substitution, B, substitution, C, conformity, or D, defining the purpose. When all of the homes in a defined area are similar in design and value, it is an example of the appraisal principle of A, highest and best use, B, substitution, C, conformity, or D, change or the neighborhood cycle. Property which is overpriced due to an emotional attachment created when the owner built the house himself becomes an example of A, fair market value, B, value in exchange, C, value in use, or D, value in distortion. When an appraiser is trying to estimate value by finding the best comparables he can, he is applying the principle of A, highest and best use, B, substitution, C, conformity, or D, contribution. Okay, let's go over the answers real quick. Okay, number one, which of the following is not a requirement? Designation from the appraisal professional organization. We have the four items for the valid appraiser: signature, estimate of value, description of property, and the date. Which of the following is not an essential element of value? The answer is C, cost. Number three, for a commercial project, a narrative appraisal report is appropriate. Number four, contribution. Number five would be determine the purpose or define the problem. Number six, when we're talking about land or vacant lots, we're looking at highest and best use. Number seven is conformity. Number eight is value in use. And number nine is substitution. Any questions? Number three, narrative report. Okay, go ahead and let's take a couple minutes. Let's see. I usually only post the learning objectives for advanced appraisal, but I'm going to go ahead and post the whole chapter that I wrote for you. And the reason for that is, um, I'll share it, we'll go through it, is because I have several explanatory math problems. Now, we're not going to go through the entire chapter, but we are going to go through the types of approaches. We are going to go through the classifications of property, and we are going to discuss depreciation and its three different forms. And then I will just give you the rest of that information so that you can have it at your disposal. Let's take about 10 minutes. I need to grab some tea. Probably take about half an hour to go through our next section. And there will also be a quiz involved. And then at the very end, I'm going to post a link at the bottom. It's just a 2-question survey, and we want to make sure that these classes are working for you. And if you have any suggestions, you can put that there, but it should take you about 30 seconds or less than a minute. So let's meet back here at 11, my time. Okay, we're going to continue the conversation. And in this section, discuss the um, 4 general forces that affect real estate value. And very quickly, I am going to just show you the document that I have sent you, because we're not going to cover all of it, but at least by showing you what's in there, you can kind of navigate some of those items that you'll want to know for your test. So you have your learning objectives and vocabulary and key terms here. Included an introduction, and then we discussed the 4 different approaches. We'll talk about these, the test specific ones that are important. And then when you get toward the end of the document, I discuss cap rates, rates of return, and then I put some sample problems in here for you about cap rates, gross rent multipliers, and then you have your summary of key points. I put a quiz in there, and when we're done discussing the basics of this chapter, um, we won't cover the math, but we will do the quiz and then be finished. Let me just make this note real quick. For some reason, if it didn't attach to the chat window. Okay, so the 4 general forces affecting real estate values, and of course, they're always shifting, they're always interacting with each other. These are these include physical characteristics, uh, natural or man-made, environmental conditions, economic conditions, and government or political regulations and social influences. Are 3 classifications of properties which appraisers, apply property into one of 3 classifications. We have our service properties, which are properties that are used by the public, nonprofits, schools, churches, libraries, government buildings, investment properties, which have a cash flow. Um, and note that debt service or mortgage payments are not considered part of cash flow. They don't figure that into their calculations. And then non-investment properties, no cash flow, includes real property, homes, vacant lots, etc. In the approaches to appraisal, after gathering all that necessary data and using that appraisal checklist, the appraiser determines which of those three approaches that will be used for their report. And of course, for residential property, by and large, we use the market data or the sales comparison approach, also known as that fair market value. The second type of approach that is used is the income approach. Could be used for any property which generates income, apartment buildings, shopping centers, etc. Remember, in our previous section, we discussed that in the income approach, land is always valued separately than structure. And then the cost approach. This is used for service properties, churches, libraries, and the like. And when doing an appraisal, an appraiser can use more than one approach. They don't often, but they can. So the comparison approach or the market data approach is the one that people are most familiar with, because most people, when they go into real estate, start with residential property or they stay in residential property. And it's based on the valuation of the property based on prices for similar or comparable properties, because it uses comparison and it's based on that principle of substitution. And it is what licensees use to create a comparative market analysis for the buyer or the seller. It's a pretty accurate, will do, Abby, pretty accurate method for estimating the value of any type of property, because it gathers all of those relevant facts. And the appraiser seeks comparable properties which are similar to the property being appraised, and then gathering all that relevant data. And then sale prices can be obtained from the records, multiple listing sources, insurance companies, anything like that. And once the data is gathered, the next step is to match and adjust the sold comparable data to that of the subject property. The fewer adjustments that are needed, the more accurate the appraisal. So although no two parcels of land are exactly alike, each sold comparable property is compared to the subject property and takes into account several elements of comparison. Give me a moment. And Sherry, do you want me to email these to you too?
I'm getting them.
Perfect.
They're popping up in the chat.
Perfect. Okay, well, when I put the survey link in the window, while you guys do the survey, I'll make sure the other three of you get the documents in your inbox, okay? Okay, so those several elements of comparison, we have the date of sale. The sale of the properties being compared shouldn't be any older than 12 months. But really, to do a good comparative market analysis, the data should be 6 months old or less. The location adjustments are usually needed to compensate for locational differences. We talked about the neighborhood cycle. We talked about situs. The condition of the sale, whether that sale involves maybe special financing terms, or if there's a foreclosure or other for sale conditions. And then lastly, physical characteristics. These are determined by inspection, MLS data, interviews with the listing broker. And remember, when a listing broker puts something on the multiple listing service, by that time, they will have needed to do their due diligence in ensuring all of those items. If there's material defects, that those physical characteristics, whether there's forms of obsolescence that are occurring, that all needs to be done by the time the property is listed, and that is part of the fiduciary duty and due diligence of the listing agent or listing broker. So after completing all these adjustments, the appraiser reconciles the information, can just like we talked about with the checkbook, and give weight to each property that is most like the subject property. So differences between comparable properties and the subject property are judged in terms of their effect on the sale value. And then, they're assigned a dollar value. And where there's a difference in the comparable property that detracts from a value, that's added to the sale price of the comparable. So if one does not have a garage, but the other one does, then that value would be added to that property with the garage. No adjustment for any element is ever made to the subject property, and the appraiser never again uh, averages the value. Um, they weigh each, giving the greatest consideration to the comparable sales that have occurred recently. So the formula for that is the comparable plus or minus any adjustments, and that is going to equal the appraised value. All right, the cost approach. When it is difficult to locate comparable properties, the cost approach is often used. So this approach allows an appraiser to arrive at an estimation of value, because what the cost approach does is it asks, what would it cost if the building appraised were built today? And it's the only one of these three approaches that gives separate values for things. So we have two types of cost approach. We have reproduction cost reproduction approach, and replacement cost. And the cost approach that is utilized depends on the structure or the property in question. So reproduction cost would be the current cost of constructing a structure which is an exact replica of the existing structure, meaning same materials, workmanship, design, layout, quality. It's used for unique properties. And I'll give you an example. And with this example, you can see why reproduction costs would be so expensive. A historical home, a historical museum, some sort of real property that is a landmark. So if you are um, looking at a historical home who needs some, you bet, um, reproduction, finding those fixtures from the 1920s, materials that, have that age, of course, that's going to be a hugely expensive proposition, right? So that's the cost reproduction approach. And, because those reproduction costs might involve estimating those costs of utilizing materials and construction practices that are outdated, oftentimes it's impractical and can even be impossible to estimate. The replacement cost, it would be the current cost of constructing a substitute structure to the existing structure with similar quality and utility, but using all the current methods. So we can see this in homes, but we can also see this in things like factories. You know, uh, I think downtown there used to be like maybe a Wonder Bread factory or something. This was in the 70s. Um, but to update it, of course, they're going to use a replacement cost and um, update all of those fixtures, machines, um, material defects, things like that. You'll see that often used, the reproduction cost used with restaurants, so that uh, they're updating all the materials, but the purpose that it's being used for is the same. Okay, depreciation. Depreciation refers to any problem, say material defect, whatever that may look like, that causes an actual or accrued loss of value. When using the cost approach to the value, the appraiser must determine the depreciation of the improvements. Now, just a quick note, when a commercial property is being appraised or we're looking at depreciation, remember that in commercial properties, vertical space is just as important as horizontal space. So you know how when they ask you to um, do measurements of residential property, you do length times width, right? That's you multiply length times width, and that's how you do the calculation. With the commercial property, don't forget that that calculation is length times width times height, because vertical space is just as important as horizontal space. So the cubic foot method is used instead. If you're asked to calculate the value of the footage of a commercial property, you're going to use length times width times height. So just to know. Uh, so back to depreciation, the loss in value from what has happened when maybe improvements start to deteriorate. All that accrued depreciation is that number is the difference between the value of the building at the time of the appraisal and the current replacement cost of the structure. So something that is important to note is that while a structure may deteriorate in value, it's important to, it may show depreciation. It's important to note that land does not depreciate, only improvements depreciate. From the moment they're added to the land, they, begin to lose their value in relation to the cost of it. It's just like driving a brand new car off a car lot. The minute you drive it off the lot, it deteriorates in value. Okay, depreciation results from a couple of things: physical deterioration and obsolescence. There are two types of obsolescence. We'll talk about this. First, let's talk about physical deterioration. It's the wear and tear, the breaking down of the physical structure, which takes place over time, can result in material defects. It is often caused by natural forces and by use, may be evidenced by decay, insect damage, cracked foundations, um, you know, uh, roof problems over time. But the largest contributing factor to physical deterioration is deferred maintenance. Deferred maintenance is the expense needed for overdue repairs. And that principle of contribution is used to determine whether physical deterioration is curable or incurable. So it's curable if the amount of money needed to repair that structure will provide a greater value to the property once it's repaired. The, the item is considered incurable if the amount needed to make the repair costs more than the value added. Obsolescence. It takes two forms. And what obsolescence means is the loss of usefulness in a structure that would cause it to be less desirable. Obsolescence is more difficult to correct than deterioration, often because it's outdated, and um, it's also due to changes in the public's preference for maybe certain types of architecture. And I'll give you a couple of examples here. Age, of course, is also a factor when determining that estimation of value. And so when we look at um, ways to view a building, we view it in physical life or age, economic life or age. What that means is how much longer can the building be productively used, and effective life or age, which means how many years old is the building when compared to other buildings in this condition. So, three causes of depreciation. We discussed physical deterioration, something's not working properly. We have what is called functional obsolescence. Means everything works fine. Nobody wants it. Nobody wants your 50s kitchen. Nobody wants your 70s closet. Nobody wants your two-prong electrical outlets. Everything works fine, but nobody wants it. So um, I'll be 50 this year. And I think, like most people my age who grew up in working class neighborhoods, you may have had like two or three bedroom houses, one bathroom, and teeny closets. And we just lived like that, right? Now that is not practical for a majority of homeowners. Most homeowners don't want that. So functional obsolescence. The other kind of obsolescence is called economic obsolescence or external obsolescence. Could be called social obsolescence. And this kind of obsolescence happens through no fault of the owner. This often occurs due to the deterioration of the neighborhood cycle. Property taxes may be going up, inflation, uh, recession stuff. Those are the kinds of things that cause economic obsolescence. So the homeowner um, not only cannot prevent it, but there's not much the homeowner can do to rectify that situation. So, three causes of depreciation: physical deterioration, functional obsolescence, everything works, nobody wants it, economic or external obsolescence. Lastly, we're going to talk about the income approach or the capitalization approach, because in this approach, the appraiser is no longer concerned with what the property is worth, but with the future income. And the appraiser is attempting to answer the question, how much will a potential investor pay for anticipated cash flow? And consequently, the value of the property is based on the income that the owner will receive and the rate of return that the owner will find acceptable. So, value of future benefits. This is where we're looking at return on investments, recapture rates, things like that. So in your packet that I sent you, and we'll email you in just a moment, um, on the last couple of pages before your summary of key points, you will see the cap rate and NOI stuff and some points to remember. For example, if a cap rate increases and NOI remains the same, the value decreases. Cap rate decreases, NOI remains the same, the value increases. And you'll be given those step-by-step problems there on that and the gross rent multiplier. Okay. We have good, about 5 minutes. We've got 7 questions on that advanced appraisal quiz. Let's take a look at them really quickly. According to appraisers, a public school would be considered which of the following types of property? An investment property? Guess I could share this document. Sorry about that. Let's do that real real quick. It's always easier when you can read it. Okay, according to appraisers, a public school would be considered which of the following types of property? An investment property, a non-investment property, an economic property, or a service property? Which of the following is not true of an amenity? It may be internal to the property. What is an amenity to one person may not be an amenity to another person. C, it may be located outside property boundaries. Or D, they are found only on residential properties. When the cap rate goes up and the NOI remains the same, the value will A, remain the same, B, increase, C, decrease, or D, it depends on the economy. Which of the following is not an example of obsolescence? A poor floor plan, B, insufficient insulation in the exterior walls, C, increase in property taxes, or D, paint coming off the exterior of the building. Land is given as a separate value in which of the following appraisal methods? Market data, cost replacement, income or capitalization, or land is never given a separate value in any of the approaches. 6, when using the comparison approach, the appraiser is attempting to A, adjust the subject property to the comparable, B, adjust the comparable to the subject property, C, find a property that is identical to the subject property, and D, adjust both properties to find an average. 7, in determining the value of an income property, an appraiser is most interested in A, location, B, interest rates, C, projections of future expenses and rents, or D, cash flow. Okay. So we have number 1, service property. Number 2, B, an amenity to one person may not be an amenity to another person. 3, decrease. 4, paint coming off the exterior of the building. 5, cost replacement. 6 is adjust the comparable to the subject property. And 7, cash flow. Okay. Any questions? All right. I am going to go ahead and put this survey link here. And I'm going to put my email, and my text information here. If you have any questions, please feel free to avail yourself. Even if you come up against a quiz question, um, you can screenshot it and send it to me if you're confused. But I look forward to hopefully having you in classes again. Like I said, Saturday, 10 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, 11 p.m. Central Time. I'll be doing a math calculations class, and I will provide you the work and answer sheet for those. And again, if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out, okay? And I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day. If you complete that SurveyMonkey link, I'd sure appreciate it.